it is time for us to move for the afternoon keynote session on innovation, leadership, and making an impact. So for this session, I would like to invite Paula Dowdy for this. So to give a brief introduction, she has been a senior vice president and as well as the part of the leadership team of the executive committee in Illumina. She has been part of the leadership team, which was involved for launching the first powerful Illumina sequencing for NovaSeq. And she is also overseeing the Cambridge-based accelerator programs for Illumina, which is being for the first time outside of the US. So with this, I'd like to welcome Paula for this session. Please have a round of applause for her.
Thank you so much. I didn't make the instrument. I have a lot of esteemed colleagues that did that. So really thrilled to be here today. I feel it's a tremendous honor to be part of this. I enjoyed the morning and many of the things talked about, biodiversity, oceans, COVID, I'm going to cover from a slightly different angle. And the afternoon is super exciting too. I've got some of my colleagues and customers from the industry, so what a day. So congrats to the organizers of this for bringing so many topics to life. But my theme today is really mostly about leadership. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me and my background. I think most of you know Illumina, but just a refresher because things have changed a little bit in the last few years. I'm going to talk about leadership in crises, and we clearly went through some in the last couple of years, but I have some ones from further in the past. Innovation in the pandemic, my personal story there. A lot about R&D, both internal and external, and then also some lessons learned I've captured over my years in business. So let me start with me. I've got some flags, some pictures, some companies. And why I'm so excited to be here. What a phenomenal international crowd. I am the daughter of a Swedish mother. I grew up most of my life in the United States. And then I moved to England about 22 years ago, where I've had roles in the UK, across Europe, Middle East, Africa. And as part of that, I think that defines me. I love the diversity of different cultures because they're just magical. And, take advantage of this session because, how often do you get this diverse of a cultural group together at one time? I have had quite a few different roles, but before that, on my education, I need to put my hand up. I'm probably the only person in the room that doesn't have a scientific background. When Bobby asked me to speak at this, I said, remember, Bobby, I came from somewhere else. I was a history major at UC Berkeley with a dream, crazy dream, of becoming a lawyer. Now, any of you dreaming about becoming a lawyer? No, I don't think so. Anyhow, I got sidetracked. My first job out of college, when I was contemplating taking the GMAT, I ended up taking a sales role in the Silicon Valley. And then a few years later, bumped into this infamous company called Cisco Systems. With the aptitude and ability to learn and sell in what was pre-internet, my career flourished. And, I guess that's lesson number one. Sometimes where you're going is not where you're going to end up. And then fast forward many years later, I had the great opportunity to move to London. And, as said, I loved Europe, I loved travel. And so I came over here with Cisco and helped them grow their business and had a series of really pretty exciting roles across this region. And then a few years later, I got a headhunter call for this smaller company called Illumina. I said, are you making a mistake? You know, this is Paula, great in tech, great at sales, great at growing businesses, but I don't have the background. But in the end, they took a risk on me, and I guess I took a risk as well, and joined Illumina in 2016. And, you know, the story is a good story. You know, in that period of time, we've doubled the business. We've taken it from 500 million to over 1.3 billion last year, going to close to 1,200 employees across Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and really making this become a super important hub for the company. And then, you know, I'll come on to the accelerator a little later, but there's some excitement in what Bobby and I have created here in Cambridge. But you'll see some gorgeous photos below of my family. I've just celebrated my 30-year wedding anniversary. My husband's an engineer. The joke in the family is it easier to teach an engineer how to sell or a salesperson technology, or science for that matter? I have 3 gorgeous children, and we've been through some tough stuff, especially in COVID. You know, the discussion earlier today about mental health, you know, really hits home. And I think all of us have a loved one or a friend who have been challenged in this arena. But through everything in life, I support them and they support me. And I feel very lucky to have what is a great family. And of course, my cat. How many of you are cat people in the room? Yes, okay, we're special. And you know, I've recently moved back to the East Coast of the United States, and the birthday cards over there are terrible. They don't have the British humor. So I'm always looking for a good cat birthday card if any of you have any. So that's me. Let's shift gears and talk quickly about Illumina. It's not a company commercial, but just in case any of you don't know who we are. Founded in 1998, but of course the milestone moment was when Illumina was savvy enough to acquire and integrate Solexa, which came out of Cambridge. And what's super cool, a few years ago, we celebrated their anniversary with, as part of Illumina, there's these cool jackets that said Illumina Solexa. I did steal one. And tons of the scientists and leaders are still with us. You know, and you know, that's what's core. Many of you will work for big companies and you'll have your own companies. But how do you integrate something great and then not lose that amazing talent? It's hard to believe we have 9,000 employees now. I mean, we're getting big. And clearly, we need to continue to innovate and out-innovate ourselves because we have lots of competition. They are alive and well, and more of them are popping up by the day. So, but it's a super place, and we're continuing to invest quite heavily here in the Cambridge area. So, let's shift. Leadership in a time of crisis. You know, the pandemic was hard. I mean, super hard. And I'll come on to what happened at Illumina during that time. But at the beginning of the pandemic, I kind of reflected back of some of the tough stuff I've lived through. And perhaps the most difficult one was in 2001. So many of you would have been young kids then. You know, when we saw 9/11 happen in the Twin Towers. I know exactly the room I was in. And it was just awe-defying. And so you go through all of that emotion, but then subsequent to that, there was what was called the internet crash, the bubble burst, the dot-com burst. For any of you that were in the tech industry at the time, it was pretty dramatic. At the time, I had about 100 people working for me. I was covering many of the alternate service providers that had popped up in the late 90s. And I found myself, with my business falling through the floor, having to reduce my team by 50%. And some of these young engineers I had only hired 6 months before. You know, none of that seems very real right now with the, you know, there's more jobs than there are talent. But that was pretty terrible. You know, I had, you know, a young engineer literally cry in my office. And I think back on how important it was then to just be a good person. I gave him a hug, trying to be kind. We did actually give pretty good packages. But the most important thing is we treated our folks with dignity. And I then, 2-3 years later, when the market came back, because it always does, you know, the biggest compliment to me was getting a phone call, you know, asking, is it time? Can I come back now? And so sometimes those little things you do are just so very, very important in leadership and in life. I think now to what we experienced in COVID, and which was also somewhat surreal and not so far ago. You all remember when China sequenced and got the genetic code of the virus, January of 2020. Here in Cambridge, in Illumina, we were, I guess it was mid-February, mobilizing to send everyone home. And, you know, I just kudos to the IT department and so forth, where you're taking close to 1,000 people and putting them remote in the space of a week. And then, of course, we had to continue to support our customers, ship product, and do the best we could in that environment. But then once things settled down, I remember getting calls from UK Gov folks and saying, can you sell us some PCR machines? Illumina doesn't do that. You know, there was a lot of things that we couldn't do to help the world, to help our customers. And that's when we came together and we started just a simple thing. Well, why don't we just spend some money? And we match funded all our customers that were doing COVID research. Now, that wasn't solving the pandemic, that wasn't doing testing, but it was doing something. And we actually ended up funding over 160 institutions in Europe alone. So we thought it made a difference. But again, it wasn't really making a difference. Subsequent to that, we had a unique opportunity to start to collaborate with the Sanger. We do a lot of collaborations with our customers. Genomics England is in the room. That's probably one of the biggest ones. But in this instance, we jointly created a way to do COVID sequencing on NGS. And initially, it was maybe it could replace PCR testing. Initially, perhaps it was just helping the Sanger. But ultimately, it turned into a product. Now, I don't know about you, but developing a product in 4 months is unreal. And of course, once this started to take off, our US colleagues, our scientists in San Diego got, added a lot more brute force. But it started here. It actually almost started with a very simple thing. At the time, we had the majority of our staff at home. And I remember sitting outside a grocery store for one of those stock-ups right before things got tough, begging my San Diego colleagues to let me have a few more scientists stay in the office to work on this collaboration. That was important. If you can't get the resource to spark the idea, to do the work, you're never going to solve the problem. And then fast forward to that fall, while it was still tough and we were supporting our customers and The Sanger are off doing their stuff. We couldn't sell COVID sequencing to save our life. I think we scrapped 50 million of product in November of 2020. And then everyone remembers the UK variant, right? I think we gave it a better name afterwards. Well, finally, people wanted to sequence the virus. And of course, the whole world around surveillance, not just around Western countries, but also in Africa and globally, became super duper important. So I feel a lot of personal pride and humility that we were able to make a small difference, and huge learnings in that. The other thing I take back from my Cisco days that we've brought into our internal work during the pandemic is when things are slow, yet you have all this amazing talent, commercial talent, scientific talent, services talent, that might not always have enough to do before this big surge in surveillance. And what we did back in my tech days that I brought forward to the organization here is we did a ton of training. We just invested in our people, learn, collaborate, so that when we come out of this, we're a better organization. We're more fit for purpose for whatever the future brings. So lots of learnings from the pandemic. I'm sure some people want to put it in the far distance, but a lot of good stuff came out. You think of the uniqueness of meeting people, customers in their living room at home, and how while we were all so far apart, we were also so close together. Okay, so enough about the pandemic. I just briefly wanted to talk about R&D at Illumina, because as a market leader, we need to ensure we don't fall on our laurels and be taken over by, the 10 companies nipping at our heels. So huge investment this year alone at $1.1 billion. It's across all the core areas. But with the theme of this program, I started looking a little more deeply into what are we doing in innovation in sustainability. And interesting to note that everybody wants us to make our products faster, cheaper, easier. But they also want us to make them much more sustainable. So some of the things that are in the works right now is, what would happen if we reduce our waste and our packaging from 50, 60, 70%? What would happen if we could sell our reagents and ship them in an ambient way? All that waste that we send out there with dry ice. Because the data infrastructure of our products is so core, what would happen if we could reduce the energy and storage that's needed for genomics? And many more areas. And so, I felt proud that we're making our small mark. But I know there's more out there. So then I shifted gears, and rather than talk about Illumina, I thought it'd be important to talk about the ecosystem. So the accelerator, we started this in California quite some time ago, and it's your classic startup engine. It's not a real estate play. We provide obviously the space and the sequencing and the coaching and the funding, and we've had so many successful companies. Some of them are listed above in the last 5-6 years. But back in 2018, 2019, we started exploring, could we do one here? Is there the funding? Is there the ecosystem? Are there enough startups? Does it make sense? And so we spent a good year or two looking into the viability of doing one here in Cambridge. And initially, I kind of thought, oh, God, it's really cool. But, I got to hit my numbers. I got to worry about the organization. This is a lot of work. Maybe we can't take it on. So first, I got convinced. I met some of the startups. I met a lot of funding bodies, and I felt that Cambridge was a good place to get started outside of North America. And then I had to convince the company. I had to convince Illumina corporate that no, don't go to China. Don't go do, somewhere else in Asia. Come here. And we got the support, we got the funding, and it's been tremendous. Now, of course, we opened our doors in 2020. So the first few cohorts have had to been entirely virtual. But it's been a great success. Any of you guys that are ready, the next application is October 1st. Come talk to us. But you learn even more from the companies around you sometimes than your own company, and that ecosystem, because we don't invest with an appetite to buy the companies. We invest to understand all the different applications that are taking place in the genomics stratosphere. So, and also proud to note that 50% of our co-founders are women. And so we've also had, tremendous diversity. And let me just throw it out there. You don't have to be based in the UK. You can be anywhere in the world and then either come to the one here or come to the one in San Francisco. So we don't limit ourselves just to 2 countries. But I'm super proud and that we were able to kick this off, and now we've got a good cohort. I think we're interviewing for our 4th group in the fall. So I wanted to talk about one of the companies that has come out of the accelerator because I saw the themes, I saw the other talks, and I thought, well, let's stay on the sustainability theme because it's so fascinating. So this one, Biomakers, which is led by 2 Spanish entrepreneurs. I met them a few years ago, and it was a real cool concept, right? It was, how do we do genomic sequencing to produce better wine? I'm like, okay, that's not going to solve world hunger, but it's certainly interesting. And as they started, the first couple years in the company, they did a ton of work. I mean, they're both Spanish. They're both from the wine region there. And they quickly found out that the soil, we heard that earlier today, is more important than the vines itself. And as they started to build their database and understand more and more of the soil, they thought, actually, let's pivot. We're not going to just focus on wine. Let's focus on all types of crops. Apples, wheat, strawberries, you name it. And they quickly determined that, wow, the soil is alive and the soil quality matters hugely. So they're in the midst of building this database. I think they've done over 120 crops across 50 countries. They've done 50,000 sequences. And they are really inspired that knowledge of the soil can help everything we talked about this morning in terms of biodiversity and trying to make an impact. And quite frankly, as I was interviewing them to check in to make sure I had the story right, they kept saying, kiss the soil, kiss the ground, kiss the soil. And who's watched that movie? Any of you? One. Isn't that a great movie? Okay, and maybe it's not scientifically accurate, but it's still inspiring that maybe we can make a difference in the way we farm. So watch the movie. I put it on the little group thing. And then shifting to the most recent conversation we heard about oceans. Now, this is not my customer or one of our startups. Mindaru are a very large organization based out of Australia. But we actually have some of our instruments sitting on a boat doing sequencing, which is mind-boggling in its own right. But apparently only 1% there's 20,000 marine species in the world. We really don't only know the genetic information about 1%. So this new concept that we could actually sequence the water in the oceans to better understand the sea life and their attributes and how they're responding to global warming will help us make better decisions going forward. And so they are also in the midst of building a massive database to kind of help us all look at our oceans globally and the role that hopefully we can do to turn things around. So I'm just about to finish, so get your questions ready. In summary, if I try and sum up some key lessons learned, is first, it's all about the people. It sounds so hokey, but it really is so true. You know, building great teams with great talent that respect and can work together is what's made me successful, bar none. I've been in 3 different industries in my life: telecom, Cisco, networking software stuff, and now in genomics. And the only common thread that I've had in my 3 careers has been my ability to build great teams. I think the second thing that's super duper important is to ensure that you think through that you won't always go in the same direction. You think about the breakthroughs that happened during COVID, you know, going one direction and then finding a solution. You think about the breakthroughs that happen to a startup that pivots their direction because they got an aha moment. I could do something even bigger. Look for those breakthrough opportunities, which you can find in a crisis. I think in a crisis, we all think out of the box. We don't, you know, I mean, everything's different. You can find it and find your innovation in lots of different places. And then I would leave you with one more. Remember the small things. Sometimes the small things you do make the biggest impact. The phone call to San Diego saying, please, can I have a few more scientists come back into the office to help on this project? Might have made the difference. So with that, it's Q&A time. Let me just remind you all, I'm the non-scientist in the room. So if you stump me, you stump me. Oh, and I had one other story I forgot to tell. The other reason why I helped fund this project and agree to speak today, it was on the screen earlier, and I forgot to talk about it. I was president of a club called AIESEC in college, AIESEC. Apparently it's still around. It's a large student-run organization, and our role was to raise jobs for foreign students to come to Berkeley. And my year, we raised 50. And so when I see anything student-run, I feel warmness in my heart, and I want to help. So congrats to you guys.
Hi, thank you for the interesting talk. Leadership is one of my favorite subjects. I'm in business school at ESA. My name is Nikki, but I do, unfortunately, for you also have a scientific background, a PhD in immunology. But I was wondering about 2 things. One thing is, because it seems like you're investing in a lot of different companies with different kind of subjects. So what sort of is your investment thesis with the Illumina accelerator? And then kind of to bring it back to leadership, what I guess is usually the best tip that you give these founding teams in terms of teamwork and leadership that you can share with us?
Yeah, and I put the slide back up because it might help answer the question. Slide number 8. You know, you'll see we split between diagnostics, therapeutics, synthetic biology. Sometimes in the consumer and software space. So it is quite broad. And I bring the business mind to the interview process. And of course, there's a lot of folks from our R&D team that also sit on that, as well as Bobby. We're normally backing the person, right? Or the team, because there's normally two of them at a minimum. And then we're also trying, I mean, if you don't need to do any next generation sequencing, some of our core value kind of goes away. So we're not going to go outside of that. We also have an ethos, we're not going to invest in, something that competes with what we're working on, like some companies do, because our intent isn't to acquire. So, and that's why when I was building this talk for you all today, I thought, God, the last time we did the interview cycle, there were so many food testing, how to make a better lima bean with more protein, ag type companies. I thought, wow, there's something going on here. But hopefully that answered your question. I don't know that my advice on leadership is any different than the advice I just gave right now. I think number one, we need to be human beings, and find our passion on what we can do, and then get that team. But thank you so much.
Thanks a lot for the talk. So my name is Hao Yu, and I'm actually a project coordinator from Sanger. So thanks for your help during the pandemic. So my question here...
Those were crazy times.
I know. So my question here today is I know in the industry, like a team, we usually have people with scientific background and people with non-scientific background like you. And people, like teams in this, tend to have different mindsets between people and lead to conflicts. So I want to ask, how would you solve such kind of conflicts and the difference in mindset?
Yeah, that is such a good question, because you're right. You need the scientific and the commercial. You need the old and the young. You need the diversity of cultures. Yeah, that's so important, but so hard, right? Because I think human nature, we want to hire people just like us, but then you don't get someone challenging you. So, you worry about any organization that has everyone that just says, yes, boss. And so I think teasing out in that interview process that, hey, this person will stand up and have a voice, even if the voice is quiet. I know for myself personally, my voice is sometimes too loud. And I have to force myself to not be the first person and listen to everyone else in the room first. So I think a lot of this is just us understanding our own strengths and weaknesses, and then being mindful that if you're too quiet, you got to push yourself forward. If you're too loud like me, I got to pull myself back. But an excellent point about the importance of diversity of style.
Yeah, hello, my name is Alberto, a student here in Cambridge. I think this question is going to be very controversial, but yeah, out of curiosity, because you said that you've been working in many teams, and it is very important to make a great team. But there is many studies that suggest that, for example, 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people, or that even such rules that probably you've heard of. And your experience, are they true, or do you always have to put lots of emphasis so that you try to make everyone in the team work very well, or?
You mean work in terms of productive, or work in terms of collaboration?
Everything.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, in a commercial organization, the number one objective that's always on your back is a revenue target. I've had 35 years of public company revenue targets on my back. And so naturally, you're going to have 20% just be outstanding, a big lump in the middle being pretty good, and then some not so good. And you're always trying to pull that mid group up. but the way they get to their revenue goal could be very, very different. I come back to having diverse teams, and often diversity of age is the most important thing you can have, because the older folks, men and women, are often threatened by the younger folks. The younger folks think they can do it all, and then they stumble and then need some advice. And so if you can get that, I benefit a lot from reverse mentoring. As I have, 3 children in my 20s, I get a lot of it. Probably more than I want. Back to getting a team and a system to work, you never should strive for equality. I don't think that makes sense. I think you got to find the nuggets of each one and then align them, to your customer base. The person that's going to work on all our startup businesses is probably different than the person that's going to be focused on Genomics England or Sanger or one of our bigger customers. And so that's how we do that. I don't know. It doesn't look like I answered your question, but.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I'm Joella, and I'm a PhD student in neuroscience. And I was wondering, how does competition work in driving a company? You also mentioned earlier a collaboration with Sanger. How does Illumina approach to this, and what is the best way to approach it? Because I know sometimes it can be better. You compete and you have a better product. It motivates the team. And I don't know, just having a more relevant situation with the pandemic, would Pfizer and Moderna give us the best vaccines if they were competing against each other, and who has the best product and the best trust? Or would they have given us the best vaccine if they would collaborate with each other? So does that collaboration close any gap?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I feel like, in most large companies, you either develop it yourself, you partner with it, or you buy it, right? Build, buy, or partner. I think you have to have a mix of that, because no one company can do it all. Personally, I feel competition is super healthy. Right, because you need to get the best technology, you need to service and support it well, you need to hire good commercial people that care and that will meet your needs. So I think competition's very good. I can't answer the Pfizer-Moderna question, but I also think partnerships are really hard, and we probably don't do enough of them, because in the end, if you can get synergies from 2 companies and 1 + 1 = 3 or 4, that's excellent. But it's harder, because you don't have that ownership and that control. And then one of the things I'm also super proud of over the last few years, just to open up the genomics field and get reimbursement for oncology testing or reproductive health. We're doing, I want to say, 60+ evidence generation projects across Europe alone, where we're working with one of our customers to create the evidence that then we can take to help get, non-invasive prenatal tests approved, for example, that just got through a reimbursement in Germany, or whatever it may be. So I think that's forcing us to hopefully, be a better and more collaborative company. Good question. These mic runners, I think, have the toughest job of all. So.
Hi, I'm Juan. I'm a student from Imperial College London. I have a question. According to your own experience, in which type of startups is usually more successful? The one that has a clear leader that gives the orders and that guides the team, or a startup where there is not a clear definition of roles or leadership? Thank you.
Yeah, I kind of think both, because you need a leader, and that leader can pivot in direction. But I think good leaders create environments that you want to be in, right? I had the fortune, my last few years at Cisco, I led some of the startups we had acquired in the software space and in data and analytics. And, that was a tricky job, sort of integrating software companies into a huge company. And the ones that worked was where we held on to the leader, to the talent, because they then helped us make the startups culture also Cisco's culture. So I think that's super, super important.
Hi, I'm Madhu and I work at Amgen. Great presentation. Just curious to know, because we at Amgen during the pandemic, we had a lot of attrition. And, a part of that was of course, the company rethought a lot of strategies in order to how to keep the employees motivated. And then, we slowly saw a change. And I think whole biotech had a lot of, industry-wide, it was kind of like a pattern. So what do you guys do at Illumina to just keep your employees motivated and stay within your company?
Yeah, I know, super good question. Yeah, and we lost our attrition rates went up quite a bit last year because the market was booming and people took some of our talent, unfortunately. This is something I learned. I had John Chambers, from the previous CEO of Cisco, mentored me for a while, and he treated Cisco, which was 50,000 people, as his family. He called it his work family, and that's what I try and do. I try and create this Illumina Europe family. Because people will stay for people. Yeah, you lose some, and I think attrition's higher in America than it is here. But you'll stay for your boss, or you'll stay for your colleagues. And in the pandemic, we didn't have that ability to have the fun bit where you do the 5K race, or you grab a beer, or you chat in the office. It was all work and no fun. And so this last year, I've killed my travel budgets, just making sure people get time to see each other. Because when you feel you're part of a family, a work family, you're probably more apt to put up with some of the times when you don't like something. It's like, oh, that's going on, but I got this good stuff going on over here. That's the only silver lining to this slightly tougher market we're in right now, is, there won't be 1,000 jobs out there that I have to worry about losing all my people every day. But that's interesting you say that about Amgen. I thought Amgen was so amazing because they own Decode, which is an amazing customer of mine. Oh, okay. I've been to Thousand Oaks once. It's way up there. So.
Thank you.
Do we have time? We're up.
The time is almost there, but maybe you can just take one question.
Hi, my name is Belen Sotomayor, and I study a PhD at Cornell. I think I have a general question that I haven't heard this morning, and is that many times, like at our laboratories, we have like amazing ideas going on, but we are afraid of failure, meaning that most startups, especially in the healthcare system, fail. And so I would like to know your thoughts about how do we deal with failure, or how do we prevent it?
Yeah, you can't prevent failure. I think you need to deal with it. And just as a leader, you need a culture of failure. You need people to be able to make mistakes. Otherwise, no one will do anything, right? So I think we need to embrace failure. As I said, we built a product called COVID-Seq that we had to dump, and then it came back 6 months later. So how do you deal with it? I don't know. I think, sometimes you just come back to the basics of, what's so bad if failure happens? Then you go on to do something else. Failure, when you look failure in the eye, it's really not so terrible, right? So, but we can't get rid of it. And I think organizations that give people the room to make failures and mistakes and then learn, the worst thing you can do is make a failure and not learn from it. When I first took over the Illumina team here in Europe, there was definitely a little bit of a fear of failure. And so everything was San Diego. Oh, they won't let us do it in San Diego. That's our corporate offices. You've got to empower people locally to learn to lead and make mistakes, and then they'll get better. Otherwise, you will never have an empowered, passionate organization. So, and don't worry, I've definitely failed a lot. So, all right, thank you so much.